Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing the really complex journey of Indian agriculture, all the way from colonial-era land policies right up to modern digital markets. And if you're studying the Indian economy, especially for the civil service exams, this is a must-know topic. We're going to be dissecting the key policies that have shaped a sector that is, to this day, the nation's backbone.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the history, the foundations of land ownership. Then we'll jump into the huge technological shift that made India self-sufficient in food. After that, we'll get into the weeds of how the government actually manages this massive system. And finally, we'll look at what's happening right now with market reform.
All right, first up, land policy. You really can't understand what's happening today without knowing this history. It is absolutely crucial because it forms the bedrock for pretty much every single challenge and reform we see in Indian agriculture.
Now, to really get a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, look at this number. Almost half, 49% of India's entire population still depends on agriculture for their livelihood. That one fact alone tells you why these policies are so critical and, frankly, so intensely debated.
So at independence, India inherited this system of deep-rooted exploitation. It was mainly defined by three different colonial land systems. Now you've got Zamindari, Mahalwari, and Rayotwari. And what's really key to understand here is that while they all had different structures on the ground, they all led to the exact same outcome, the exploitation of farmers and a rigid system that just choked off any kind of progress.
So what did the new government do? Well, its first major move was a really ambitious plan for land reform. The goals were nothing short of revolutionary. I mean, they wanted to completely dismantle these old feudal structures, get rid of the middlemen, and put power back into the hands of the actual farmers, the people actually tilling the soil. But, and this is a huge but, for all those noble intentions on paper, the reforms were a massive disappointment in reality. So let's take a look at why they fell so short of those transformative goals.
It wasn't just one thing. It was this toxic combination, a perfect storm of problems. You had social resistance because land was all about prestige, not just economics. You had a serious lack of political will to push through tough changes. Corruption was everywhere. And on top of all that, a huge administrative failure. There were no accurate land records. All this meant that those deep-rooted problems of inequality just stuck around.
Okay, so with the structural land reforms pretty much failing and the country dealing with recurring famines, the government had to pivot. The focus shifted away from social engineering and towards a technological solution. And that pivot was the Green Revolution. This was a total paradigm shift. It was all about using science and new inputs to solve India's chronic food shortages. And the results? They were absolutely dramatic. We're talking a boost in food production of over 250%. Incredible. Now, this slide perfectly illustrates that the Green Revolution wasn't some magic bullet. It was a whole package deal. The high-yielding variety, or HYV, seeds were the star of the show, no doubt. But they were basically useless without the right chemical fertilizers, without controlled irrigation, without farmers getting access to credit to buy all this stuff, and without pesticides to protect these new kind of vulnerable crops. Everything had to work together. And the impact was immediate and profound. For the first time in decades, India could actually feed its own massive population. It was a monumental achievement for food security. But as we so often see with these kinds of top-down solutions, solving one big problem created a whole new set of long-term ones. So those very same inputs that fueled the revolution, well, they started to cause some serious environmental stress. We started seeing soil health get worse, a dangerous overexploitation of groundwater, and big regional imbalances because really only areas with good irrigation like Punjab and Haryana saw the massive benefits. And these are the challenges that policymakers are still trying to solve today. Okay, so now India has all this extra food. Great, right? But it created a brand new challenge. How in the world do you manage it all? This led to the creation of a massive, really complex government system to handle everything, from buying the grain to pricing it, storing it, and getting it to people. At the very heart of this system is something you've probably heard a lot about, the minimum support price, or MSP. The easiest way to think about it is like a price guarantee, a safety net from the government. It's designed to protect farmers if market prices suddenly crash. And just as importantly, it's how the government buys the grain it needs for public distribution. So the government buys all this grain through MSP. Where does it go?
Well, it enters the Public Distribution System, or PDS. This is the main government channel that ensures food security for the country's poor. It distributes subsidized grains to millions of families, basically connecting the farmer's field directly to the citizens' plates.
Now, MSP and PDS are definitely the heavy hitters in this toolkit, but the government has a few other instruments up its sleeve. It keeps a buffer stock for emergencies. It uses something called the open market sales scheme to sell surplus grain on the open market. This helps keep prices from spiking and tames inflation. And it has a price stabilization fund to try and manage the crazy volatile prices of things like onions.
All right, let's turn to the final piece of this whole agricultural chain, the markets themselves. We're going to look at how farm produce has traditionally been sold and the big efforts underway right now to modernize that system.
For the longest time, because of state-level APMC acts, if you were a farmer, you didn't have much choice. You were basically forced to sell your crops at these regulated wholesale markets, called mandis. Now, the original idea was to protect farmers, but over time, the system often created local monopolies, really limited farmers' options, and prevented them from getting a competitive price. So, the big modern answer to this fragmented system is ENAM, the National Agriculture Market. The main goal here is to use technology to link all these physical mandis together on one big online trading platform. But its impact has been mixed. I mean, it's definitely improved price discovery in some places, but there are still huge challenges, like states not adopting it uniformly, the need for better digital literacy among farmers, and the fact that a lot of mandis just don't have the physical infrastructure, like grading facilities, to make it work smoothly.
But even with all those challenges, the grand vision behind this reform is still really powerful. It's all about moving from that old, fragmented, localized system to a single, unified, transparent, and competitive digital market for the entire country. And that brings us to the central, multifaceted question that Indian policymakers are wrestling with today. How do you balance all of this? It is a delicate, tricky act with no easy answer.